all seen this surreptitiously placed job announcement. I'm going to forward to the actual title slide today. Welcome back from lunch. I know it's a difficult act to follow, lunch and the wonderful cognition session beforehand, but we have some exciting talks lined up for you. And we'll be talking about the fundamentals of decision making. And when it comes to aging, of course, people are making decisions about all kinds of things. Many of them are remaining in the workforce, are making workforce decisions, decisions about housing, decisions in the financial realm, decisions about interpersonal relationships, decisions about healthcare, and ultimately decisions about the end of life. And over the last few decades, these kinds of decisions have become more frequent. So people are now making more of those choices, in part because people are delaying retirement, so older people continue to make decisions in the work life. There's geographic mobility, and so people have to make decisions, well, they have to decide whether it's actually a good move to move to the Sunshine State. There's also a loss of default options. So for example, when you look at retirement, for a long time, company pensions were kind of the default, but now people have to decide whether or not to sign up for a 401k, and then once they sign up, they have to decide where to invest, and they have to decide later on when they should be starting to pull out money and how quickly to do so. And those default options are lost, and so now people have to make more choices also in the healthcare domain. So there's no longer this expectation that the healthcare provider will make the decision for people, but instead there's an emphasis on informed choice that shifts the decision-making responsibility towards older adults. There's also more information available online, and this is a great thing if you know how to use it, but if you make the wrong decisions in reviewing this information, you may end up diagnosing yourself with tuberculosis instead of a harmless cold. And then finally, society as a whole is in love with choice. These are the different numbers of Crayola options that you had in 1903, right? There's a few. And then you kind of move out all the way to 2010, and there are too many to count. And this exponential growth in choice options has been affecting all areas of life. So more choices are to be made, and more choices can be a good thing if you know what you want, and you can make those choices well. But there's the problem that as people get older, they may not have as much resources in terms of recovering from poor choices. Right? So if you make a poor choice late in life, bouncing back from it becomes more challenging. One reason for that is that poverty rates are still relatively high among older adults, and if anything, there's a tendency among the oldest old to be even more affected. Also, of course, people's physical resources decline with age, and if somebody has a disability, again, it may be physically more challenging to bounce back from a poor choice. So all of that puts a premium on maintaining decision skills in older adults, right? And so the question has been for a long time, do older people have what it takes to make all these choices in a way so they don't have to use up resources fixing their mistakes? And when I was preparing this talk, I realized that I've been working on this area for the last 15 years, and when I first started to become interested in this, there were a couple of really good review chapters available, but there wasn't much. And a lot of what was being done in terms of research was relatively narrowly focused on this area of information search and strategy selection. And also, there was a tendency to look at the well-known changes in fluid and crystallized cognitive abilities and to apply this line of like a cognitive perspective onto aging and decision making. We've certainly come very far from these initial days, and just recently, Tom Hess, Jonelle Strau, and I were able to publish a full book just on the latest trends in aging and decision making. And it's important to note that as the field has moved ahead, we didn't just do more research along the lines of looking at how cognitive changes played out, but the field has really expanded towards a more inclusive perspective on aging and decision making. Perhaps the most important development were dual process theories that really acknowledge that decisions involve both deliberative and rational processes and affective and experiential processes. And the decision making really means that both of these types of processes operate in parallel and that they show divergent age trajectories, and that this one, the affective experiential processes, seem to be relatively spared from age-related decline. So once the perspective on aging and decision-making was broadened, we could start to ask interesting questions. And one example is a study where we looked at information search, and for a long time, cognitively inspired work had found that older people seek less information before they make their choices. And so Laura Carstensen and I did a study where we looked at how people scanned this array of choice descriptions before they made their decision, and what we found was that older people searched for less information, but more interestingly, once we looked at the valence of the information, we found that this difference was due to older adults not really looking at negative information as much. Now, because our theoretical considerations had led us to believe that this was not some form of cognitive decline, but that it was a form of motivated cognition, we were able to see what happens when you tell people to engage in information-seeking goals, and what happens is that the age effects essentially go away, right? So that's, and it was an interesting early finding, and of course we were excited by this kind of work, and so we shouldered right on and decided to look at how such effects can play out in the context of strategy selection and information evaluation. And this is actually a study where Joe Michaels here was the lead. And we presented people with lots of pieces of information about different health-related choices. And so in order to make a choice, people had to keep these pieces of information in mind until at the end they were asked to make a choice. And there's really two different ways that you can make this choice. Either you can take a deliberative approach, where you keep each individual piece of information in your mind, and then when it comes time to make the choice, you integrate. This is, of course, resource intensive. Or you can take an affectivistic approach, where essentially what you do is you keep a moving tally of how you feel about the options, and so there's much less to integrate by the time you make the choice. And so what we were trying to do, inspired by the earlier findings, was to shift people's strategies for processing around. And so there was one group that had an emotion focus and another group that had an information focus. And so we were interested how that would affect choice quality. So the good news is it worked for younger people. So telling them to have an information focus really improved their decision quality. And even an emotion focus seemed to improve them a little bit. But if you look at the older adults, actually they were doing best in the default condition. And telling them to shift their strategies from what they were doing by default actually decreased their decision quality, right? So this is kind of a caveat. And so since the dual process approach was first introduced to the aging and decision-making literature, we have become more aware that there's a need for differentiation. So for example, there's incidental affect, that affect is just kind of free-floating before you make your choice. And there's integral affect that's really specific to the decision options that you're considering. Also, there's a realization that maybe we need to look not just into emotions per se and not just at valence, but maybe also at arousal. And we need to have a broader understanding of where in the decision process that we are. And this kind of harks back to what we discussed earlier this morning about the different steps in emotion regulation, right? So this is kind of what many see as the core of decision making, but the research has branched out now. So there's more questions about how do people decide in the first place that they have to make a choice? Or maybe this is a choice they don't have to make, they can just delegate it. And also, what kind of goals are they pursuing as they make the decision? So the field has started to understand those issues. And then, of course, there's also the question of outcome evaluation, right? So do older people know that they made good or bad choices, right? What kind of standards do we use to evaluate? And so, in a sense, the literature on metacognition that had disproportionately focused on meta-memory in later life has started to take this metacognition approach to look at decision-making. So today's panel is going to take us further along this pathway. So we have 4 exciting talks lined up. The first looks at neuroanatomy and how it can help us to understand some aspects of age differences in risky decision-making. The next talk teases apart the relative roles of fluid and crystallized cognitive abilities in the context of monetary decisions across the lifespan. Then we'll learn more about strategies for interventions and communication tailoring. And then finally, we'll be hearing about psychological inertia and how it may play